Oh,
I'm
okay.
I'm just going through everything.
I'm just. Do you know if Russ is in?
He was not in just a second ago.
He's not responding to me. Mm-hmm.
I'm just going through everything. There he is.
Patricia, will you verify that you can talk into your mic?
Testing. Testing.
No, that turns it off.
Testing. Testing. Clerking is. Doesn't this technology make clerking easier? Yeah. Volume's off.
On time.
There we go.
Testing.
Thanks, guys. Ready when you are.
Okay. 6:03, I'd like to call this meeting to order. Commissioner Lynn, could you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Please rise. Hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which stands one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Michelle, could we please have the roll call?
Commissioner Gaius,
Here.
Commissioner Leach.
Here.
Commissioner Lind,
Here.
Commissioner Lothrop,
Here.
Vice Chairman Bakta,
Here.
Chairman Liu,
Here.
and Commissioner Truxillo is excused.
Item number 4, public comment. Notice to the public. This time is set aside to receive public comment on matters not calendared on the agenda. When recognized by the chairman, it is requested that you please state your name and address for the record, and please limit your comments to 3 minutes. Under California law, the Planning Commission is prohibited from generally discussing or taking action on items not included in the agenda. However, the Planning Commission may briefly respond to comments or questions from members of the public. Therefore, the Planning Commission will listen to all public comments, but will not generally discuss the matter or take action on it. Are there any public comments not on the agenda tonight? Item number 5, the consent calendar. Notice to the public. All matters under the consent calendar are considered routine by the commission and will be acted on by one motion. Item A, for approval and filing, the Planning Commission's meeting minutes of April 26, 2022. Any comments regarding the minutes? There's one maybe typo,
Okay.
but and it's super, and or it could just be the use of the word. I think it was proposed and purported were
What page?
page 3, item B, paragraph starting Commissioner Truxillo asked what changes were proposed or purposed.
Thank you.
Any other revisions or comments? Would anyone like to?
Make a motion to approve the April 26, 2022, the minutes with the corrections.
The second? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Gaius,
Yes.
Commissioner Leach,
Yes.
Commissioner Lind,
Yes.
Commissioner Lothrop,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Bakta,
Yes.
Chairman Liu.
Yes.
Motion approved for the Planning Commission meetings from April 26, 2022 with the correction noted.
Item number 6, public hearing. The only item tonight is item A, the conditional use permit for 369 East Pine Street. Elaine, could you give us your report?
Excuse, one moment. Could you want to open up the public hearing first, and then she will give a report, so it's within the public hearing?
I see. Okay. Yes, thank you. So yes, I'm opening the public hearing prior to Elaine's report.
Yes, because it needs to be within the public hearing, is that correct?
I was going to explain that. So I'll just, thank you. Good evening, commissioners.
Mhm.
It's very nice to see you again. It's nice to have meetings in person, be able to see everyone. As introduced, this item is regarding a conditional use permit for 369 East Pine Street. The applicant is proposing to convert the existing building from assisted living to workforce housing. I would like to include my staff report within the public hearing, so I would request Chairman Liu that we open the public hearing and I can provide my staff report.
And we will go ahead and open the public hearing.
Okay, I will provide my staff report then. Michelle, could I please ask you to lead the presentation? Thank you. Okay, thank you. We can start with the next slide. So the item was introduced, this item is with regards to Sterling Heights, which is located at 369 East Pine Street. It's a picture of the facility. As I have already stated, the building was constructed as an assisted living facility and has been used as an assisted living facility since its construction in 1984 or 5. The proponent is requesting to convert the 72-unit assisted living facility into 69 units of workforce housing, which would include 58 studio units and 11 two-room units. There's currently 39 parking spaces on site, which are located under the building. And the zoning code would require for residential use 2 parking spaces for each 1 dwelling unit. So the proponent is also requesting the Planning Commission consider a reduction on that overall parking requirement. The property is zoned R2000 and the building is pre-existing non-conforming to that zoning. Next slide, please. This is just another shot of the outside of the facility. This is the back facing the park. Next slide. And this is the adjacent property to the west, and that property came with the purchase of the Sterling Heights property as well. So both properties are under the same ownership at this time. Next slide, please. This is an aerial view of the property. As we've discussed, the requirement to convert to workforce housing would necessitate 2 parking spaces for each dwelling unit. There are currently 39 parking spaces in the underground garage, and there's no additional room on the site. The site is fully developed to accommodate parking anywhere else. Next slide, please. As you can see here, access to the underground parking is you go through an alley to the east. It's a city-owned alley. It's also used as public pedestrian access to the park. And then you go under the facility and you come out, and then egress is through a city alley on the west side of the property. Next slide. As I stated, the adjacent property came with the sale of Sterling Heights. So in order to accommodate a minimum 1-to-1 ratio of dwelling units to parking, the proponent is proposing to convert the backyard of the adjacent property into 32 parking spaces. You'll also achieve 4 more parking spaces by removing the loading dock that's located in the alley. So he's proposing a total of 75 parking spaces for the 69 units. 75 parking spaces would also include 3 ADA units and 2 electrical vehicle charging stations. Next slide, please. This is a photo of the city-owned alley located on the east side of the facility. As I said, it's used as public access for the park, the Pine to Park Path public improvement that the city did a few years ago. Next slide. This is the egress alley that's located on the west side of the facility. So 4 of those parking spaces would go adjacent to the building through that alley. That alley is also used as public pedestrian access to the park. Next slide, please. And then in the rear of the property, there is a tank farm, which is an obstacle at this time to allowing for the circulation to go around the back of the building directly into the proposed parking. And so to access the proposed parking, you would need to go under the facility and then come out on the other side and go into the parking lot. Next slide, please. This is a photo of the underground parking. Next slide. This is a photo of one of the units. The units are all standard. The 2-room units would be created by taking one of the studio units and creating an opening in the wall between the 2. But all the units are standard in the building. Next slide, please. This is looking the other way towards the full space of the unit, and then each unit would have a bathroom. Next slide. I also should add, though don't have photos of it, that there is a commercial kitchen located in the facility. There are several common areas in the building. The applicant is proposing to have on-site managers who I think would be responsible for maintaining those common areas. And I think there's also a proposal to allow for persons to prepare meals using that commercial kitchen. Under the R2000 zoning, incidental commercial uses solely for the purpose as a service to the occupants of the multiple building are allowed. That would not require any additional planning commission approvals or entitlements. If the applicant, or if the building was to be used as a restaurant with customers coming in, or if the meals prepared on site were to leave the premises, that would not be allowed within the zone. So I've included a diagram of the parking layout within your planning commission staff reports. This might be a little bit difficult to see on the screens here. Discuss the number of parking spaces, but there'll be 32 parking spaces provided by this new layout. The parking would be accessed by coming out of the parking garage, coming down the alley and turning in. Those parking spaces located furthest to the east in the parking layout adjacent to the parking alley would be pulled into directly from the alley. There's several standards within the City of Bishop Code as it relates to new parking improvements. And there's certain areas in which this parking layout meets those standards, and there's a few deviations. One of them is that the parking improvement code requires that there is a curb around the parking improvements. So that would be waived to allow for vehicles to pull into the parking lot from the alley and be able to back out. And as you can see, there's just really insufficient space with that amount of property to configure it differently. The applicant is proposing a 6-foot wide landscaped barrier on the west side of the property and a 3-foot wide landscaped buffer on the south side of the property adjacent to the existing residence that's there. The west side of the property would be landscaped with large trees to replace the trees that would be removed for the construction of the parking lot. The Bishop City Code requires a minimum of 2% internal landscaping. And again, as you can see, based on the amount of space available, it's not possible to reconfigure the parking to accommodate internal landscaping. Lighting is not currently proposed in the parking layout, but if proposed or required in the future, the building code by the state of California requires that the lighting would be bug rated, which means that it would have to be downcast. There couldn't be light trespass to surrounding properties, and it would need to be dark sky rated. The applicant will pave the parking lot according to the code standards. Discussed the curb coming out of the alleyway. The code also requires a 5-foot CMU wall between parking lot improvements and residential uses. And the proponent is proposing to build a CMU wall between the residences to the west and to the south. As I stated, the applicant is also proposing to plant trees within the landscape buffers. I believe there's also trees that are proposed on the north side where there is not a wall adjacent to the park, and that would mitigate the trees that are going to be removed to accommodate the parking. The driveway width is 24 feet, which means the minimum standard for the City of Bishop Code. This application was reviewed by the city administrator, the public works director, the fire chief, building inspector, and the police chief. There were not technical concerns with the proposed layout, and there are ongoing conversations to ensure that the building would meet all necessary building code requirements to be converted to a residence, but that does not, we do not need to take those building code compliance. There doesn't need to be any discussion of the building code compliance within consideration of the conditional use permits to allow for the residential use this evening. Staff is proposing a categorical exemption under CEQA as this project constitutes infill. With that, staff would recommend that the Planning Commission should hold a public hearing and consider the request for a conditional use permit to allow for the property at 369 East Pine Street to be used for long-term workforce housing, to reduce the parking to dwelling unit ratio from 2 to 1 to 1 to 1, and to approve the parking plan as presented. If the commission chooses to approve the application, staff would recommend that you adopt a resolution of the Planning Commission of the City of Bishop approving the request for the conditional use permit. Alternatively, the Planning Commission may continue the public hearing to a future date and provide specific direction to staff regarding additional information and analysis needed, or the Planning Commission may choose to deny the conditional use permit. That concludes my staff report. I'm very happy to take questions you may have. Thank you.
I have a procedural question. You touched on, the existing non-conforming use is a variance from the R2000 zoning. Is it correct that this is a conditional use permit and not a variance? I mean, so it's not permitted by the zoning. And this is a change in use, and some modifications are being made. So is this the correct procedure, or does there not also need to be a variance for the proposed usage?
In this instance, and I might defer to council to elaborate, a variance is, I think, as we've discussed, very specific, and there's very particular findings that need to be made that probably would not be applicable to this project, because the existing density of the building is so much higher than the zoning that was placed on top of it. So the building was entitled prior to the adoption of the zoning code in 1984. The allowable density, I think the property is about 40,000 square feet. So the allowable density would be 20 units. So this is considerably higher. In order to make the findings for a variance, you need to say that, for instance, there's certain topographical issues associated with the property that would require that we do a variation on the code. Since this is pre-existing non-conforming, and it would not be possible probably to make the substantial changes to the existing building that's in place, we determined a conditional use permit was the appropriate vehicle for this entitlement consideration.
And I assume you made that determination with council?
Yes, and I would invite Mr. Hildebrand to elaborate if he feels it necessary.
Good evening, Chair and Council. Russell Hildebrand, Deputy City Attorney. This is really, as you can tell, just rather an oddball situation. There's a number of ways to go about addressing this. In light of all of the housing laws that have been passed by the state legislature, Housing Accountability Act, it's going to tell us if you can find it consistent with the general plan, then the zoning objective standards really don't matter. The city needs housing. I think what's important tonight is that you've been presented with a public hearing and a vehicle for providing you an opportunity to consider this project on its merits. It's a reuse of a non-conforming use, as Elaine stated. So that's why it's being presented the way it is. I think this is the best way to go about accomplishing all of the goals that are consistent with the city's general plan as well as state housing law, and give you an opportunity to consider and discuss this project as presented.
Okay, thanks, Russ. I had one other just question for my own understanding. The development of the parking lot, is that consistent with the zoning?
I think that's another, that is a very tricky, again, as Mr. Hildebrand said, the application by no fault of the proponent is weird. This is an existing structure. It is sitting empty. And at one point or another in the future, the city is going to have to identify and accommodate some kind of use for it, ideally. So one of the things that complicates the application is that the adjacent property is under the same ownership. Could I, with my home in a single family residence, choose to develop the backyard as a parking lot? Yes, probably I could. Would the neighbors appreciate it? Is it the highest and best use of my property as a single family residence? That's for me to decide. One of the conditions of approval, if the planning commission approves the residential use, is to work out a parking agreement between the two properties, which are bifurcated by the city alleyway. And so I think the details of what the property entitlements would need to be for that would probably be sorted at that time.
So doing both of these as conditional use, well, not doing the one and doing the parking lot as a conditional use permit does not open us to legal liability that council is uncomfortable with.
I would defer to Mr. Hildebrand if that would open us to legal liability we should be concerned about. Thank you.
No, it would not. Not any more than your typical, there's always some, potential challenge to any project that's approved or denied. So, but this doesn't create any kind of an extreme or heightened concern or litigation challenge.
Elaine, can I ask if you know how many of the 39 spaces that are underneath had been used previously by previous tenants, or just the?
I do not know.
I have questions as well, but I think I'll wait until we're open up for that.
Are we allowed to take? Should I? Okay, yes.
If you would like to invite public comment at this time, that would be appropriate if there's no further discussion or questions from the commission.
I think I would just like that question answered, and then we'll start, but if that's okay.
As the neighbor directly east to the assisted living, they had a van that would take residents to their appointments. And there were probably, I want to say somewhere between 10 and 15 private cars that used the underground parking. Some of those were employees and some of them were residents. And then also in the front, of course, along the curb on Pine Street.
Thank you. And just for the record, could
Yes,
we please have your name and address?
my name is Nell, N-E-L, Hecht, H-E-C-H-T. And I live at 387 East Pine. But I never saw the parking lot full.
Thank you. Are there any other general questions regarding the staff report before we?
Elaine, the applicant say the potential tenants is going to be long-term tenants or just less than 30 days? And if it's less than 30 days, they will be subject to TOT, transit occupancy tax?
Yes, thank you. I did neglect to mention in my staff report that the proponent has been in conversations with the Northern Inyo Hospital in Toyabe. And there is a letter, it's not an agreement, so I'll say it's a letter of support from NIH included in your agenda packet, stating their need for workforce housing. Short-term rentals under 30 days would not be permitted within this zoning. They would be subject to our short-term rental ordinance. So the applicant could subsequently apply with approval of this as a residential unit to have one short-term rental if he lives on site.
Any other questions regarding the staff report? Would the applicant like to make any comments and address the commission regarding the application? Could you state your name and address, please?
So Aaron Schott, and here regarding the Pine Street project. Just wanted to kind of give a quick overview. Representing the business owners in the area. Most of the business owners that I run into are having the housing issue. And as you guys have heard, And that's what kind of prompted us to put this project together, was our lack of being able to get workers. And this project came from making that happen. So we're trying to figure out how to, with what exists, to make a really nice project, do a good job on it, and make something that the town would be proud of. And so we've been listening to the city and making adjustments to make that happen. So that's pretty much it. Thank you.
Are there any members of the public who would like to speak on the item?
Again, my name is Nell Hecht, and I'm the neighbor to the east of Sterling Heights. I'm also a bicyclist, and I was involved with some of the bicycle planning that was going on with the city probably 15 years ago, and I was really in support of the bike path that goes from the back of Sterling Heights from 2nd Street, also along the community garden and the city park. There's an awful lot of people that do use that west alley, not as many people using the east alley next to my property. And I'm a little concerned about traffic flow and safety for the, especially kids who are going through that alley. And when David Graw was working with the city, I had suggested that maybe there would be some kind of signage that could help, you know, like a stop sign or a speed bump or something right before that west alley, so that traffic would slow down and kids coming through that alley on their bicycles would not, you know, have an accident. And so I am concerned about that. And I'm glad to see, after talking with Aaron, that the traffic pattern is not going to go around the back side and actually cross over the community bike path, because I think that if it's possible to accomplish what he wants to do with the traffic flow and go through the back of the Sterling Heights property, that would be the safest. So anyway, in your consideration, I'm just hoping that you can make some kind of, I don't know, controls, a ball, is it bollard? Is that the little cement, you know, controls? I don't know, something that would help limit the amount of traffic that's going, I think, too fast, really, basically. And if there's not a stop sign, I don't think there on that alleyway, so that maybe people will have a little bit of a chance to slow down, or signage on East Pine, perhaps, you know, saying that there's cross traffic. That would be, I think, helpful.
Thank you. Are there any other public comments regarding tonight's application? Thank you. Please state your name and address, please.
Good evening. I'm Kelly Davis. I'm the CEO for Northern Inyo Healthcare District. Would you prefer my personal address or my employer?
Northern Inyo Hospital is good. Thank you.
That's 150 Pioneer Lane, Bishop. I appreciate, on behalf of the housing situation that the community is facing, Northern Inyo continues to struggle with a national staffing shortage. And when we do secure both travelers and new hires, we have a significant issue with housing. We continue to lose those potential candidates on a regular basis because they cannot find any housing. A number of years ago, the district opted to start to relinquish some of the rental units that we had secured in the local community, because our hope was to be able to provide those as access points for other individuals to secure. We have again started to absorb more rentals as they become available, so that we have opportunities to secure housing for travelers and new staff. So I think that Aaron has taken on a significant challenge that could potentially meet the needs of our community in a way that we really don't have access to right now. And so I'm supportive. I think that we have to begin to think outside the box as a community as to how we secure housing for folks to come in, because there is such a shortage. So I hope the commission will consider this, and I recognize it's a big endeavor on Aaron's part. I also recognize that there are some challenges for the neighborhood and for the community, but I don't know what other options we have. So I hope you'll consider this.
Thank you. Any other members of the public who'd like to speak?
I have a question.
Oh, wait, I guess I would have to close the public.
Oh.
Sorry.
Thank you so much.
I just following along. So with that, I'd like to close the public hearing and move on to the commission hearing. Discussion, please. And no vote is required for that.
If they require here one tenant per unit, and there's a worker coming from out of town, and the partner comes to spend the weekend, how that issue will be addressed? They'll be allowed or no allowed?
We would have no means to disallow it or enforce that. So residents, it would be safe to assume that residents would be able to accommodate guests.
In the same unit?
Yes.
Okay.
On that then, would guests be defined by their stay? Like it's proposed that it's a single tenant unit, each unit, correct? So would there be some mechanism to enforce that the family of 5 didn't move into the 1-bedroom apartment?
I don't believe that the city would be able to enforce that, no.
Mr. Schott, you want to?
Come to the podium.
So way that I'm looking to set it up is is an adult single only occupancy is what I'm trying to set up. I mean, you might have 2 people in there, but it's one parking space, but no kids. I mean, I'm trying to keep it where it's a professional housing area. And the goal is 1 person per room.
Have you looked into the legality of, as a landlord, I can't only rent to adults.
Yeah, I think that's housing discrimination by state law.
Inclusion issues.
So, well, then, I mean, I'll have to adjust to what the law says. But, I mean, what our need is right now is I have we're tying our housing into our workforce, and those are the ones that are going to have access to the housing. And they have to have a job through us to get that job, and to get that housing. We're going to set it up as like Mammoth Mountain does it, where it's all tied together and we know who the occupants are and who's coming through.
And in my case as a landlord, I have in the lease, the month-to-month or the yearly agreement, you are the tenant that I am working with, and you are the sole or, the named persons, occupants, and any other person is considered a guest and they have to stay. There's a limit on how long they can stay.
Right.
So.
But Tricia, that doesn't preclude, married couples from renting from you.
It
Right.
does not.
Right. I mean, you can't.
I cannot
deny them.
discriminate against
Yeah.
a family
Yeah.
applying
Right.
and considering their.
Okay, so to be clear, the intention is for single person occupancy, but there's no way of enforcing that or legality to back that up.
Yeah, no, we're not going to, we can't go against the law, but we will be already seeing the people that are going to be renting our location.
You want to go? Because I know you. So 39 plus 36 is 75. There's 71 spaces with underground and the new development behind the,
Plus 4 spaces in the alley.
okay. I also echo concerns about flow of traffic there and safety when it comes to the bike path and children. I would just maybe throw it out there that those be deleted. Since if we chose as a commission to approve this, 59 units, you have 71 spaces. you make the requirement. I'd also throw out there that perhaps any handicapped or electric vehicle stations be placed near, is there an elevator?
There is an elevator. I mean, the handicap will be placed around the elevator. Putting the electric vehicles in there would be really cost prohibitive.
Okay.
The side spaces that I'm proposing, it's really easy to put the electrical vehicle charging next to those on the side of the building because the main transformer and the main power is located next to those 4
Which
spaces.
I understand.
And plus also for fire, opening that up for fire actually gives room for a fire engine to come through.
So that being said, I would still, my opinion would be to delete those, make sure that handicapped is placed near an accessible elevator or easy entrance into the building, not over here in
That's a requirement of the.
Okay.
ADA.
parking lot. And then electric can be put wherever they would need to be. That gets, we don't have to worry about waiving the curve then and all, some of those other things.
No, that's all included as consideration in this application. You'd be approving the parking layout as proposed.
Okay.
I also have some deep concerns about the public alleyway, the city-owned alleyway, specifically the one on the west side. I know I used it a lot when when my kid was little, and I would cycle from my house and that's how I accessed the park by bike. So it was me on with a bike trailer. And I always, I didn't realize it was a city right-of-way or a city maintained alleyway. I thought it belonged to Sterling Heights. So I always went very quickly, just in case somebody called me out. But I know a lot of kids use that to cut to the back of the park. I still use it to get across town to stay off Main Street because it's one of the safest ways. So I completely and 110% support the idea of trying to find ways to house people to come and stay. You know, my father very quickly was in the ER, and I had to just think again, you know, brand new ER docs. Every time you go, you seem to see a new one, and it'd be great to have staff come and stay versus check out the area, realize it doesn't work out for them, and leave. So every time I see new staff at the hospital or anywhere, I thank them for giving Bishop a try. And so I commend that, but I would also like to see that moms on bikes, kids on bikes, grandmothers pushing carts and strollers have an easy way to get to the park across town without fear of getting backed into. I also have the same concern regarding Whitney Alley. A lot of people use it, and they'll walk right down the center, as they do with this alleyway going to the park. So we have to figure out something, I think, to find a way to accommodate the need for housing, but also the fact that the request is for so many vehicles.
There is the street right over it that's wide open, and it would be better to block that all off and it would be safer, but I mean.
Is that Second Street that you're thinking?
Yeah, I mean, Second Street is a very wide street, doesn't have through traffic, and it's really close.
So I have similar concern about the alley. I think for me, the most problematic feature are these, I think there are 10 parking spaces that have to be pulled into directly from the alley, right? Which means they also have to be backed out of directly. And with, pedestrians using that alley for access to the park, I would worry about, safety there. And my other concern, just generally speaking, and again, I commend the attempt to provide more housing. I mean, I think, the general notion is great. I do think that, we shouldn't just jump to provide, to do anything to provide housing. We should provide housing that suits the community and doesn't negatively impact that neighborhood, beyond reason. So, I think there are a lot of optimistic assumptions that go into, you're going to have only single professionals living there. They're only going to have one car. The guest load is not going to be such that there isn't going to be a transient, demand for, 50% more parking. et cetera. So there are a lot of assumptions built into that. And I would worry about spillover into the neighborhood, into Pine Street in particular. It's one thing to say, oh, it's a single family home, and they're asking for, a waiver from 2 parking spots to 1 parking spot. That's going to put an extra car in the street. But with the potential to put 70 extra cars on the street, at worst case scenario. I think it's a little bit different consideration. And obviously, given the nature of the property, I don't think it would be reasonable to demand, 2 to 1. But the more parking we can create, if it were 1.5 to 1, for example, and if there were the ability to mitigate these spots that lead directly out onto the alley, I think both of those would be directions to go in. And I guess one question for you, Aaron, is, you're already demolishing the yard of this house. Is there really a compelling reason you can't just demolish the house and, wall off the alley? Put a curb that alleviates the safety issue. You could move those spots to the front and you could probably gain another 10 spots. Is that not something we could consider?
I would prefer not. It's a $500,000 house. And it's, that's definitely a financial challenge. If the city wanted to take care of that $500,000, then that's fine. But I would be happy if, there is an entrance and an exit. There's an east side and a west side. If we just went on to the east side and made it where the pedestrians went that way and you block off the fence on the east side, that would be a lot safer. Nobody would be backing out on that side. It would be a one-way traffic going in and everybody would have a clear view on the east side of that building. So the 2 options that would work best for that is the east side or 2nd Street.
I wish we had a map of that, Elaine.
Could you go back, the parking layout, well, no, maybe it's not in the parking lot. Could you go?
It gives
over
us
the slide
Pine
again?
Street, but we don't get 2nd Street. We don't get,
Oh, the full context of.
yeah,
that? I
we don't get the
apologize.
context of 2nd Street and the other alleyway that leads into
If-
the parking.
If you go into your staff report, there is on this page, with a picture of the outside building, it's an attachment to the staff report.
Okay.
There is a contextual map.
Oh,
that
there you go.
shows that.
So currently, they're coming on either direction from Pine Street, is that correct? And going northbound through an alley to the back entrance of the underground parking,
For the vehicle traffic, yeah, they come in.
correct?
On the east side.
And they're
go
gonna
under-
go through the garage, cross the alley. And as it's shown in some way, through the garage, down the alley.
Through the garage, out. Currently, they go down the east side, under the building, and then out on the west side and egress in that alley. And with the proposed parking, they would come out from under the building.
Mhm.
They would cut across for the available parking. There's no barrier there for those 10 parking spaces for this to the east. And then there's also a driveway all the way to the south side of the parking layout to access the other parking stalls that are interior to the parking layout. And then all the egress is in that west alley to Pine Street.
Can you define that for me? I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time. My hearing's bad.
Just they drive out.
Yes, but this is not a one-way only alley.
It is a one-way alley.
It is.
It is signed do not enter currently.
Yeah.
Is that alleyway wide enough to accommodate two-way traffic?
I haven't measured it, but I don't believe so.
No.
Yeah, no, it's not.
It's not. They need to be at least 22 feet wide, and I believe that alley is 15 or 20, I can't remember.
It says 23 at the narrow point. But
Yeah.
still, that's still tight.
And I think that's also measuring to the side of the existing building, not the fence.
Because then the question is, if says one way, in theory, then people won't be driving down it to park into it. Alleviate some of the,
But they'll still be backing out
they
into the
still will be
alley.
backing out.
And, you're running the gamut of 10 cars every time you walk down that alley to or from the city park.
Yeah, I think that maybe this could be reconfigured definitely a little differently. Even if the entrance to it was on the north side versus the south side, it may cut down some of the wall being there and obstructing the view, and I don't know.
The wall is a requirement.
Yeah, I get the wall,
Okay.
but if we moved where the entrance is to the parking lot, to the north end, then you're not trying to pull out and I don't know, maybe not
But the traffic still would be pulling
visible.
directly into those
Yeah.
first aisle of parking because there's no way to accommodate an internal driveway that's walled off.
Aaron, just a quick question. So being one way in, one way out underneath the garage, and lots of people now drive the Strider vans and stuff. What is the clearance underneath there? Will they be able to go through there?
Hi, I don't know the exact clearance underneath there. I do know, I have been paying attention to it, and it definitely does clear a van with a couple inches to spare. So I have not ran into a problem with that unless they have something on the top of their roof. Actually, a friend of mine just came underneath there, and he did have a unit on the top of his van, and he cleared underneath. So I was surprised.
Thanks.
In my opinion, the alley should be no problem because the only time on the west side when the people are going back to in the morning will be busy. Then in the evening, on the east side will be busy a little bit. So I think it should be no problem. And if they create a jam or anything like that on Pine Street, in that case, it's distant Sean's job to figure out what to do in that situation. But I think should be no problem because right across my property, there's an alley. And I've seen that alley is not that busy. Maybe once or twice a day, somebody will go halfway. It's not extremely busy like large city, they are busy. So I don't think so.
Okay, and then I have another question.
Sure.
There's mention of like an eatery in-house.
So thinking of setting it up where we would make meals for the professionals that are there and have them be able to purchase meals from that area. We definitely don't want a restaurant. So I already have enough of those.
So perhaps language would need to be included in regards to not being able to take food off the premise and not being able to sell food to non-residents.
We could include that as an additional condition of approval. I'd be happy to do it. It is implied by the zoning as well.
I did have one, I had a Pinot Pies approach me, and they would like to make pies and sell pies out of the area. And they don't have a nice facility like that restaurant, and they would do, they don't, I think they would have one car there, and the extra parking, they would be able to park right in front of their dock.
That's not the concern. I think the concern, besides like health department concerns that pop into mind of taking food in and out, would be the parking. Like if you're using that as another business front.
Yeah, no, we definitely don't want it as a business front. And no, I don't want it as a business front, but it would be, it is a full kitchen, so we would be, possibly want to make food out of it.
Application states that Northern Inyo and Toabi will be taking almost half the property, and we already heard support from NIH this evening. What is that? So does that mean they're reserving the right to, are they a conduit for tenants, or what does that process look like?
So part of the goal is if I go to some of the government entities and they reserve 10, 20 spaces, then they're just going to reserve those for their people, and they're not, and they would manage those units. And so they're not always going to be full. They would have them waiting for staff that they bring in.
Which is a common practice in
But it-
Mammoth, I know it is.
And it also helps us take load off of the property too.
But are they not, Northern Inyo is not renting from you and subleasing to their tenant, or are they?
They would manage 20 units or whatever the number is from us. And they would sublease to their
Got it.
traveling nurses and manage that themselves.
So, and building off the bat would be rented out already, pretty much.
Yes. Yeah, close, almost half.
Can I ask if the 58 studio units and the 11 two-room is what works? Have you thought of not having quite as many studio units and still be financially viable?
The shrinking that down already takes away, already makes the financial viability really hard. I mean, just the property taxes on that building, it's over 40,000 a year. So.
I'm just trying to think of ways that we can
and I-
reduce
and
the
I-
parking requirements.
And I also have a piece, I mean, we have, so our requirement on the parking, we were going to assign spaces. And if somebody came to us and said, hey, I need to have another one, it's like, well, we have the whole Bank of America parking lot. It's like, you know what, you can use that temporarily, but it's like, if you're parking there, we're gonna fine you, we're gonna tow your car.
Parking on your own spaces, but
They're gonna park in
but
their
that
own-
doesn't stop anyone from just parking on the street.
Yes. I can't do anything about, it, but in our spaces, we can tow their car away and it will be managed.
I heard that getting a new parking enforcement person on staff at some point.
It's in discussions. right
Okay.
now, but-
Well, can you tell me what the hours are? How many hours a car can legally be parked on a given city street that it's not already signed?
So the state law allows for 72 hours
72.
being parked somewhere without moving the vehicle.
Thanks.
But-
So, sorry, go ahead.
That, this would be private though, correct?
Yes,
This would be private, but just for overflow.
Or spaces would not be private.
They are private.
They would still gonna be
They're within the private property boundary.
boundary. Okay.
Yes.
So with regard to, you're the owner and you've probably run the numbers on various plans. But if I just look at it on the face of it, you have 11 suites, right? And 58 studios. And so at your stated rental rates, that would be about 75K per month, right? If you were to take 24 additional of those single units and decimate them to 12, right? Then you would have 23 units you could rent at 1,500, and you would have 34, I think, left that you could rent at 1,000, and that would be 68K a month, which is
I'd have a loss of $12,000.
which is 8%, right?
So I'm not investing $4 million to make $100,000 a year. It's not.
Making close to $1 million a year.
Oh, no.
So it would delay your return on your investment by
But if I'm making
10%.
$10,000 a month, that's $120,000. If I'm already at $200,000 a year and I take off $10,000 or $12,000 a month, I'm only making $100,000 a year and I'm putting in a $4 million investment. I mean, I can go get a job working for somebody else and make $100,000 a year and not have to put in a $4 million investment. I mean, how much money am I allowed to make on a $4 million investment?
To make as much money as you can, as long as you don't cause a significant impact on the community.
Yeah, and going through the numbers,
So all I'm suggesting, seems to me there are other configurations that could be considered.
so I already
It
knocked
could
down.
eliminate these 10 parking spots on the
I already
alley.
went down and knocked down, I already knocked down quite a few units to make that work. And I don't know. I mean, I definitely, this is a huge, huge, huge risk. And then, I just got done dealing with the city inspector today, and he's like, and the changes that he wants, they're hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I don't know how, I can't pass all these costs on to the renters. It's not, the profit on this place is nothing amazing. So I don't know how to make it work better than what it already is.
Justin, is the alley properly signed on both ends coming and going in and out? So it's only one way in?
Yes,
Okay,
correct, yeah, one way in, so northbound on the east side and southbound on the west side.
okay.
Yes.
So all the signage is up for that.
Yes,
Um,
yeah, including no parking and everything else that goes with that.
I mean, I do have concerns about the alley and the density, and it's no fun paving paradise to put up a parking lot. However, we need the housing, and I can definitely sympathize and empathize with the bigger employers of the area, and how crucial it is in order to bring and retain staff to the area that they have somewhere to sleep at night. So
I do agree. I think that there are configurations that only marginally change your profit margin and can improve the safety and can reduce the traffic, the potential traffic congestion, parking congestion. And also, yes, we need housing, but we also need housing that is going to be desirable and used by the community, right? And the more, it seems to me that the more units you can convert into suites, the more usable those are going to be also for hospital staff.
The problem is the cost. Have you looked into construction costs? So we are, I think we're at $100 a square foot. To build Sterling Heights is now a $15 million project. I mean, you cannot afford to build something and rent it for $1,000 a month. The numbers do not work. All the laws that have been passed and the construction laws and all the rules and regulations prevent us from building affordable housing. I mean, this is the closest you're going to get to building to affordable housing in Bishop. I mean, it already gets hard enough just implementing the rules and regulations from the state on this building to convert it. It's almost a thing like, maybe it's not worth doing. And then, I mean, we do not, this is the bottom line, we do not have staff. So, and then the problem is if I go, you know what, this studio is $2,000 a month. Now as an employer, I have to figure out how to pay them on their paycheck $2,000 a month to cover their rent and their extra bills. Like, it's not doable. It's not a cost that we can just keep passing on. I have worked very hard, and I've been working with the city very hard to shrink down that number, but it needs to make money. That isn't a very expensive project, and keeping it maintained, I mean, it's great bills. I'd be happy to give you, show you a budget on it. But I mean, yeah, I would have no problem doing that.
Well, I, for one, would still like to see other possible configurations. It doesn't seem to me that they've been exhausted. And I think considering demoing the house would be one of them.
That's $500,000.
It's not $500,000, I think, that you would realize with the parking lot for your backyard.
What?
But that also takes off a potentially desirable unit to a family that wouldn't be able to fit into his.
That's a trade-off, yeah. Yeah. So how do we weigh that against the impact on the neighborhood with far too few parking spaces for the building? A potential impact in the alley when you've got people going back and forth to the city park and they get backed over by somebody pulling out.
Well, I mean, the backing up is totally have them go down the other. We have the Second Street. I mean, I agree. I would do the east side of the building. That would be a safe way to walk down that street.
So the alleyway on the east. Is it possible to city alleyway, street and bike, pedestrian and bike use only, so that no cars other than vehicles like the fire department or the police department use it?
That probably could be done, but I don't think that will solve, that's obviously not going to solve what we're looking at tonight.
Right,
Because
no,
they
but-
need vehicle traffic.
But if we're
And-
talking about shedding, yeah.
Yeah, there's no way to really change those two alleys. And I think it's important to note right now that, you know, the cost of Mr. Schott's project, or whatever it may be, is not really what we're here to talk about tonight. It's, is this project good for the neighborhood, for the city? And that's the decision before us. So, you know, ideas like Commissioner Leach has, those are all things that we would like to consider tonight in this discussion, and not the cost of the project.
Any other comments or concerns or questions?
Well, given our concerns, I would like to see, you know, some alternate plans, maybe considered by the proponent and the city, either for reconfiguration of access to the parking lot, for additional decimation of units to reduce the need for the contentious parking spots, or possibly for considering turning the whole lot into a parking lot. That would be my preference.
If that's the case, Commissioner, and then I think we should postpone for next month more studies by the city. And we can do more research in our own.
Would there be a resolution, or would anyone like to?
Excuse me, could my wife talk?
Absolutely,
Thank you.
absolutely.
Hi, Mary Ann Schott. I'm co-owner of this property. One thing that I just want to point out before you guys just dismiss this or postpone it for another month. We are headed for, I know you guys know we have a huge housing crisis right now, but we are going to have a much bigger one that is going to affect a lot more businesses that are in town because, for example, we have the bakery we have about 80 employees, a lot of which are ready to retire. They're tired of working so much. And we don't have enough housing for new people to come in and hire them. So what's going to happen to the bakery? We need 80 people. Where are they coming from? Nobody's applying. That's one thing. We need housing now, like to train them. So that's a huge thing. That's going to affect the city huge. So any questions?
I mean, my comment would be if we're postponing this, we need to have very specific to staff about what our expectations are in new proposals and understanding that, you know, I don't feel compelled to ask any property owner to demolish a perfectly good building. I think should be an alternative to this as it stands without having to require that.
Well, my concern with the current proposal is safety in the alleyway and insufficient parking. So, you know, yes, we need housing, but we need good housing and we need housing that doesn't damage the community. So, you know, if it were possible, you know, to have fewer units and, you know, still make enough profit margin to make it work out, that would be one way. Another way might be reconfiguration of the parking lot, or possibly access to the parking lot. Those are all possibilities.
So if Northern Inyo is renting, say 20 units or whatever they decide, and most of the time they won't be used because they have visiting nurses that are going to be coming or going or whatever. When they have more need, they will have some more filling the spots and then other times they won't. Doesn't that consideration having less people in half of the building at any given time?
I think the consideration, though, has to be what's been presented to us. We can't just make any resolution based on supposition. Even though the supposition is better than what's presented, we have to plan for the numbers that we've been provided in the situation that is on paper.
So if Northern Inyo Hospital and Toyabe came up with letters saying we would have this many people using at one time, That's not going to make a difference to you
That's
guys?
not the concern. The concern is the way the parking is configured and how the spaces pull out into the alleyway.
And the density of Pine Street and the
Okay, I thought you
traffic.
guys said the number of parking spaces. He wants to demolish a house to get more spaces, 10 more spaces.
Well, I was saying that if you demolish the house, you'll have room to move those spaces from the alley,
So they're
for
not
example.
pulling out.
Okay,
And then you could also get more parking spaces.
okay.
And I'm sorry that parking it's the $64,000 question. It always has been. But we need to find something that will work with the community in mind as far as safety.
You know, I 100% agree. I have been working on with the city. This is not like, I didn't put this plan together without keeping that in mind. The one thing is blocking off the west side. If I can do that, that would give you the safety you want. The problem is that the city wanted to keep that part of it. And that, and I'm trying to work with everybody. So, I mean, if I can come back and go, hey, okay, let's close off the other side and just allow access on the east side. That's fine. But once again, even just delaying our project, the cost is a lot. So
I apologize, but that is not.
no, I understand. I'm just saying, we have gone through and we've reduced the amount of housing. We went through with an engineer and worked on the parking as much as we can. The only thing that's holding us up from deleting the whole house is the cost of a house. And it wouldn't look good. And we have the housing, we have people that would use that house. So, and the cost to rebuild that house is how much now? $1 million to rebuild the house now? That's what it is.
But who's talking about rebuilding, turning it into a parking lot?
No, I'm talking about you delete a family house. That means that house doesn't exist and it can't be rebuilt for that price anymore.
Well, these are trade bringing 75 unit or
Is
60
there any
units
more
on.
parking allowed in, any more exceptions for parking that you guys voted for?
Well, I believe the city denied an application on that same street for an Airbnb precisely because it was going to put 3 extra cars on the street, something of that order.
This is not Airbnb. This is workforce
No.
housing.
But
I
the
agree, but it's
impact
also
is the same
potentially
on
a
the
lot
residents
more
and the users of the.
No, what I mean is,
But he's proposing enough parking spaces as it
yeah,
is.
I'm proposing more than 1-to-1, which is what other things have been granted. And we need workforce housing. So I really don't know another way to make it work. And it has to be, the budget of the project has to work.
Commissioner, questions, statements, concerns?
I'll just express my opinion. I have an issue with the parking ratio. I think stricter minimum requirements there are a blocker to development, especially affordable development. My concerns, like the commissioners, are around safety of that west alleyway, and I am interested in exploring what options would be if we could have that be closed and have the east side be the main way through for pedestrians.
Doesn't sound like that's an option though, is it?
Well, nothing's out of the question, but it need to be looked at. The city, again, I will say is, I don't want to make this about money, but the city invested $1 million to build a project over there that was based around that being the entrance of it. The others have been added on later, but that is the main Pine to Park path right there. So, not saying it can't be done, and I don't like the idea of Second Street, and the reason it was not created as Second Street is there's no sidewalks on Second Street. So that's just a street. An alley is a safer way to pass than a street.
But on the east side, on the east and the west side, if you walk down both the end of those streets, there's 2 boulders at the end of each street that go to a sidewalk on the end of each street. And that sidewalk on each one connects to the park. So either one, you could easily put up a piece of gating and used one or the other. And so it'd be very easy to pick one. So if you wanted to switch the traffic to the east side, you would put a piece of gating on the west side and everybody would start to use the east side.
And I'm not disagreeing that. We just wouldn't, I'm not making that decision tonight to close something right now.
What are you feeling?
Well, I mean, just my personal opinion is that I would like to see some other options for access to that parking lot or reconfiguring that parking lot for safety. But that's just my opinion. So anyone's free to make a proposal.
And since I'm new to sitting in this chair, could you provide some guidance regarding if we needed more solutions presented to us?
Yeah, so as I previously stated, the recommendation from staff would be to approve the project as proposed and adopt a resolution. The Planning Commission may also put additional conditions of approval on the project. The commission may continue the public hearing to a future date and provide specific direction as to what it is they would like us staff to bring back at that time, or you may deny the conditional use permit.
What are everyone's druthers?
Should we, if we vote to approve the project as proposed and it doesn't pass, that doesn't kill it in the water, does it?
No, we would need a different motion.
I mean, or we could vote to approve it with a condition on access to this parking lot, but I don't know how to do that without some alternative.
One alternative that I was considering is that we will need to have a parking agreement in place. A condition of approval could be to negotiate a development agreement with the developer that includes mitigations, if council concurs that that would be appropriate.
Can you repeat that, Elaine?
It would be to approve the project as presented with a condition of approval or direction to staff to draft a development agreement with the developer where we would negotiate specific mitigations around the safety for the alley. It could be subsequently considered and approved by the Planning Commission. Would that be appropriate, Mr. Hildebrand?
I'm not sure that would be the best approach. I think you'd rather have the conditions of approval spelled out in the in this actual conditional use permit.
Well, and I think it comes down to
Thank you.
the realism of, is that going to satisfy?
The developer, I wouldn't want to sign off on something that,
Well, I mean, if we postpone this hearing again, are you going to be satisfied with an alternative, or are we going to be back here arguing about the alternative? Just as a question. So I'm willing to approve the project as opposed with, I will make a motion that we approve the project as proposed according to the resolution and adopted as a resolution.
there's the last page of that.
And then the full motion is included
The full
under the
motion? Okay.
recommendation on page 7.
Which page?
On page 7.
7.
And would there be additional and in that and as you make a recommendation, I just want clarification if there's additional conditions of approval that are included. Thank you.
And procedurally, if I personally would like to see what we would be agreeing to before I vote on it. Like if they were,
7.
right, so, but not this, but regarding any negotiation of mitigation.
I think that was Mr. Hildebrand's point, and so that is not what I'm suggesting.
Okay.
If there are, then you can, excuse me, you could include additional conditions of approval that are approved this evening, and we know clearly what they are as part of the approval for the project. And if there was going to be further modifications to the application or any further negotiations with the applicant, then it would be staff's recommendation to continue the item to the next hearing.
Okay, so my
Yes.
motion is, unless,
I would say, is there any condition that could be added that somehow encourages pedestrian traffic on the east side instead of the west side that addresses some of these safety concerns?
Staff is not prepared with any mitigation alternatives this evening.
But could staff have them by the next meeting?
I'm going to make my motion. That the planning commission should hold a public hearing above and request for the conditional use permit to allow for the property at 369 East Pine Street to be used for long-term workforce housing and reduce the parking to dwelling unit ratio from 2 to 1 to 1 to 1, and approve the parking plan as presented, and adopt a resolution of the planning commission of the city of Bishop, state of California, approving the request for a conditional use permit for the conversion of 369 East Pine Street to workforce housing and reducing the required parking per dwelling unit.
Michelle, could you?
Is
Oh,
there-
sorry. Yeah, sorry. Is there a second?
So this is accepting it as is.
Who seconded?
We're asking.
Second.
Lothrop seconded first.
Lothrop, thank you.
We have a vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Gaitis,
Yes.
Commissioner Leach,
No.
Commissioner Lind,
Yes.
Commissioner Lothrop,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Bakta,
Yes.
Chairman Liu,
No.
motion approved for the request of a conditional use permit to allow for the property at 369 East Pine Street to be used for long-term workforce housing and reduce the parking to dwelling unit ratio from 2:1 to 1:1, and approve the parking plan as presented, and adopt a resolution of the Planning Commission of the City of Bishop, State of California, approving the request for a conditional use permit for the conversion of 369 East Pine Street to workforce housing and reducing the required parking per dwelling unit.
Thank you, council members.
Item number 7, staff and commission reports.
I have no reports this evening, commissioners. Thank you.
Okay, so then I would close item 7. Does that require? Okay, thank you. And number 8, we adjourn. The next regularly scheduled meeting of the Planning Commission will be August 23rd, 2022 at 6 p.m. in the Bishop City Council Chambers, 301 West Line Street, Bishop.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And the meeting is closed.